It is blasted hot in the state of Utah. This is Heidi Hatch with Take Two and a whole lot of news happening. Maura Carabello from the Exoro group is here tonight. She had to make her way, waiting, I guess, not through protesters, but waiting for them to move in downtown Salt Lake City. Greg Hughes here, fresh off the air at KNRS. Yes. Thanks for being here. He also has his phone plugged into his battery like he's a teenager because there's a hockey game on right now you're watching.
The Stanley Cup Finals are going on right now.
Pulling for Canada?
No, I am not. I'm cheering for the Florida Panthers, and they are winning 3-1 right now. And if they win this, they'll go up 3-1 in the series, which would be excellent. So
that's a pretty impressive power pack.
Yeah, it is.
For those of you who are on YouTube,
you can see
like
you're juicing for days.
He's not messing around with his extra juice there.
You could do that. Look, it's got the
You
magnet.
bought that off of Instagram, didn't you?
No, Facebook. What they do is they mind meld me.
I didn't mean to news school you. Facebook, sorry.
So it's like a Vulcan mind meld. I don't even want these things. It's not like they guess what I want. They compel my behavior. They show me this, and I just say bye. And it's terrible. It's a terrible way to do it.
It's working, and I like that it has a magnet, so it like sticks to it.
Well, that's a way to charge it. I'm doing the double whammy. I'm charging it this way and through the back because I'm streaming a game, so I just want to have lots of juice.
Wow.
All right, it's a good idea. All right, so if you hear cheering here, it may not have anything to do with the story.
They're not my
it's
Penguins,
just Greg.
so I'm just kind of like I have a team, but I'm not like super crazy about it.
I think I'm going to be insulted. I think I'm going to decide that that's an insult.
What?
You think you can have an in-depth policy debate with me
while watching a game?
While you watch TV.
I want you to know that I think it's much healthier to be watching the Stanley Cup game while we discuss things. I think it keeps me.
Hold my umbrage.
No, it makes me more sage-like. Okay, I don't have as much skin in the game while I'm watching the game. That's not what I figured. Maybe you'll get less. My passion.
All right. Well, we need your attention because there's a lot of breaking news even in the last hour. We're recording around 7:30 in the evening on Thursday night. Currently, some of those anti-ICE protests happening in Salt Lake City. Also breaking within the last hour, Israel's military conducted a strike on Iran, which is early Friday morning there. Israel saying at this point they were targeting their sites where they're working on getting weapons made. So this could be serious going on. And more breaking news on the front of the protests. A San Francisco judge says Trump illegally called up National Guard to assist with LA protests. I want to start, though, with Israel. Maura, are we in for a rough ride with this?
Yeah, and we being the United States. I mean, so go Israel, so go has gone the Trump administration. And he's made it clear since his renewed presidency that he doesn't see much daylight between us and Israel, and things in the Middle East are not doing well under President Trump. So I think that we've met our match in terms of one-upsmanship with the Iranian regime. I don't think they're inclined towards dispassionate negotiations, and so I think that this could, in fact, risk American lives if it's not done with a deft hand. And so far, that's not been how Trump has approached foreign policy in the Middle East.
And we should note there is a statement that just came out a few minutes ago from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He said tonight Israel took unilateral action against Iran. We're not involved in strikes against Iran, and our top priority is protecting American forces in the region. Israel advised us that they believe this action was necessary for its self-defense. President Trump and the administration have taken all necessary steps to protect our forces. Goes on a little bit more after that, but we do know in the last couple of days that anyone who is non-essential in the region was pulled out. So,
yeah, look, there's been I call them the neocons. There's people that just have made a great living on the military-industrial complex and keeping us in perpetual wars. And I think that different in this administration, Trump has wanted to see peace. He's wanted to try and have those negotiations. His Middle East trip was really about Abraham Accords and joining, but also I want Iran to be a prosperous and happy people and nation, but they can't have a nuclear weapon, and that's a line in the sand. Within that administration, we've heard there's been conflict in terms of those that want to be very hawkish about going after Iran, those that wanted to give at least negotiations a try. As of earlier today, it was thought that the United States was looking at a weekend where there would be negotiations with Iran, hoping that by Sunday night, knowing that they were moving essential personnel or a family of essential personnel out, there was things happening that would certainly signal that a conflict was coming. Would that be enough to see a peace agreement by Sunday evening? And then we hear today, Friday, that there's already a strike by Israel into Iran and even Tehran. So that city, I guess they make nukes there. I mean, is that why it's on fire? But I actually think that President Trump was trying to see if there was a way to negotiate it. But with Iran, I don't think when you take their religious zeal with their desire to have a nuclear weapon, because they look at countries like North Korea, they look at Pakistan, they just think they're going to be safer with one, so they want it. I don't know that they were ever going to be able to negotiate something or trust what they negotiated. So I don't know.
But his first chapter of foreign policy is written. The book's not written, but the first chapter is written. So it will be interesting if he learned anything from the first chapter. And you know, they're saying they'll stay out of it, but he's not positioned the United States to stay out of it. He has been the consummate negotiator. He has said, I'm in the mix. He has declared himself to be masterful at these arrangements. So it'll just be, I mean, again, the book is not written, but the first chapter is, and I think that has to be acknowledged. It's not unfolding. He made plays, and Iran has called the bluff, and Israel is a really challenging partner right now when it comes to use of force in the Middle East.
Well, look, I do think he's involved. I think he wants to be involved. I think he thinks if there's a deal to be reached, he has the skill set to be able to do it. Unlike when you saw Biden during the Russia going into Ukraine, you really didn't see him getting in the middle of anything there. You saw us funding a lot of things, but you didn't see that happening where he was getting involved. I do think Trump wanted to be involved. And I do think there were people in the Pentagon that were sent on their way because they were too hawkish on getting into a conflict with Iran. And even Lindsey Graham is so giddy about this, it's just off-putting. I mean, he's just so excited that this has begun. And I would love to see something, I'd love to see a military conflict avoided. I do believe that's what the president was after as well. But look, Israel has every right to defend itself, and they are surrounded by enemies. And it is true that it is non-negotiable that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon or weapons. So here we are.
Here we are. I want to talk local with some of the protests since they've moved to Utah right now. But looking at the anti-ICE protest that started last Friday in Los Angeles, we now have 4,000 National Guardsmen and 700 Marines on the streets of LA. But in the last hour, a judge in San Francisco ruled that Trump illegally called up the National Guard to assist with LA protests and must return control to the governor. What that means, we're going to be paying attention to. So does that mean anyone who's there is going to have to come off the streets because Governor Newsom's made it clear he doesn't want them there? So we're going to be watching that. How quickly do you see this play out in the courts? Does this mean the Supreme Court's going to have to take this up tomorrow?
Well, I mean, I think this is an evolving. It will be interesting because I think that it'll evolve. What it allows is the National Guard, the governor, the local jurisdictions to do what they wanted to do. It allows them to take some of the politics out. It is an interesting scenario, slightly different than others, in which the protests are directed at President Trump's strategies, right? They're directed at this administration with some clarity. So for this administration to use undue force is an interesting call and response to the citizens of the state. Also, I find it, and I'm sure we'll go into depth more, I find it just phenomenal that people who are purporting to be states' rights and federalists are sort of saying, yeah, no, this is cool, I'm okay with this. I mean, the scenarios in the late 60s were very different. They had been going on for a long time. There's not much proof that any law enforcement agency was out of control. And it wasn't, we've seen more volatile things come out. This is right in the first day. But it is interesting that right now, the protests right now are protesting President Trump's strategies. And for Trump to weaponize the military against citizens, the courts are intervening at the right time because I think we'll be able to see local law enforcement resolve some of this tension. And remember, this is all sort of wrapped around June 14th, which I think we'll get to later, but that's a different protest.
It is funded by different people too.
And so we'll see if it gathers together or not.
So we had an interview with he's a conservative columnist and an author, but he uniquely served in the National Guard, and he's from Los Angeles, and served in the National Guard. I don't know what you call them, the group that was called up. And he used to be part of that group. He's recently retired from there and was part of the 1992 riots when they were activated. he said on our show, different than in 1992 where they did engage to try and quell the violence that was going on. The National Guard called this time were to protect the federal buildings, facilities, and agents that were trying to conduct and do their jobs who were being blocked and being stopped from being able to do it. He said that the National Guard called in and the additional 700 Marines were really around the federal buildings and agents so that the agents could then, instead of protecting the buildings, go out and do the job they were meant to do. The Trump strategy is really the strategy of enforcing federal law, which we haven't been used to. We haven't been used to people here that are illegal seeing our laws followed and enforced, but they are, and it hasn't gone over well. But I didn't know that about the role of the National Guard until he described it, that it had a more specific mission.
Who disagrees with that role and who disagrees with his interpretation of that is the Homeland Security Secretary. She has said today that the role was to seek and get rid of socialists and to get rid of people who are violently, and Trump himself said the role of the National Guard was to protect local law enforcement. So Trump's remarks disagree with his analysis, as do Homeland Security's disagree with the purpose of the Trump administration. And I think what's concerning is to not understand fundamentally how trainings and teachings of military are different than trainings and teachings of local law enforcement. And they're both really good at what they do, but they do very different things. So deployment of the military in a setting that is domestic, against citizens, their tactics are going to be entirely different than local law enforcement.
Well, first, I don't think it's mutually exclusive, that the people that were blocking the ICE agents, the people that were around the buildings, are the same exact people that are committing violence and destruction around the city. So I think you can go after the same people, and you're not talking about different.
But the tactics of going after them, the desired result from a military response is different than the desired result from a local law enforcement response.
I think that ultimately, though, the reason why you needed to do something is that if we can look in, and we'll get into this with what's going on here, we know that 6 hours of delayed response when violence breaks out made everything so much worse here.
In 2020.
In 2020, May of 2020, when we saw the riots in Salt Lake City, many will tell you that it was how that was allowed to continue on and get bigger and bigger and more violent is how it got out of hand. President Trump, depending on the reports you hear, earliest that he decided to call the National Guard, and again to protect the federal facilities and federal agents, was 24 hours, not 6, like we saw in 2020 here in May. 36 hours, many say. So anywhere between 24 and 36 hours before the president engaged the National Guard. At that point, I think it's pretty clear that that things had gotten out of hand. It isn't like you didn't see any cars on fire, you didn't see any destruction until Trump arrived. I know there's a narrative that wants people to believe that's the case, but there's just too much video evidence out there to show that the cars on fire, that the violence had started. It was going on from Friday. The first troops didn't arrive till Sunday night. And there had been violence on Saturday. You can't say there wasn't. I know people want to say no violence ever happened until Trump arrived. That's not the case. And I think at some point the president had to act because it wasn't being being prioritized or protected.
Who's disagreeing with the social media interpretation is the chief of the local law enforcement agency.
Yeah, he has a
the
boss
governor of
Mayor
the
Bass.
state.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, Greg, they're boots on the ground and they know what's going on. And I am still flummoxed by a Republican saying over and over again, I will defer to the federal government. So the next time the state of Utah has a problem, I'm going to ask why we're not deferring to the federal judgment. But the other thing is the arc of understanding protests. Let's just stick with Salt Lake City and talk about the arc of understanding protests.
Yes.
I know it's our fave, and 2020 was a unique and violent time that actually had been going on for weeks. The flashpoint was not even 6 hours. But let's talk about the late 90s when we had tens of thousands, up to 25,000 people were protesting in Salt Lake City about immigration. And we were fine. DeChristopher was fine. Occupy was fine. So to suggest that local law enforcement doesn't have a history of taking flash issues, we had failure by individual chiefs. We had failure by individual mayors. We had failure by individual leaders in 2020. But to say, yes, the federal government needs to intervene. That's not been our history. The last time this intervention happened was in 1967.
So can I ask you a
So,
question?
I mean, that was like before anyone was born here. And I'm just suggesting that local law enforcement has had tactics for years to handle thousands of people occupied and protesting.
So my
This
question
was a
is,
political
do you
hype.
think we learned anything from the 2020 riots?
Well,
Because
let's
I
talk
would say
about
that
we.
I would
I mean,
say
who
that
are
the
we?
state's preparation. I'll say the state. It's Department of Public Safety, the National Guard, the Mayor Mendenhall. Even her what she is saying today is very different than what she was doing in 2020.
The
I
city's
think there's some
preparing
things
very
that we've
differently.
learned.
Yeah, I think
that-
there were lessons learned, but
so to say we have this institutional knowledge, we got it all wrapped up, we know what we're doing, nothing, there's no problem. I think everybody, all stakeholders involved, learned something from 2020 that didn't want to repeat
Greg, I didn't
the
say that.
2020
I'm saying,
violence.
would you
in
feel
24.
comfortable right
That's
now
why people
if
have
President
to
Trump
engage.
said the National Guard should come into Utah
If
today
if
because I had
Salt
to wait
Lake
on
City
State
was
Street?
left for 24 hours instead of 6, if that was 24 more hours, not 6
Yeah,
hours,
local
I
law
think somebody
enforcement.
had to intervene.
So let's drill down to this, just so people know what's going on. There are two different protests. The one tonight is in support of what's happening in Los Angeles, an anti-ICE protest. And then on Saturday, there's supposed to be 12 to 14 across the state for No King's Day. Police have been preparing for that, and we had some questions, and we're reaching out in advance wanting to know where the mayor stood because of 2020, also where the police stood. Mendenhall didn't give us a quote, but her office did, and she was calling for peaceful protests, saying our administration is working closely with Salt Lake City Police to monitor planned protests and confident in their preparations to maintain public safety while allowing individuals to peacefully protest. That was in stark contrast, like we were saying, from 2020, where all of our sources, from police officers to even DA Sim Gill and others, said that on that first BLM protest 2 weeks later, when there was red paint thrown on the district attorney's office, windows were broken, that there seemed to be an overall push that came from the mayor down to the police to stand down and just let people get their aggressions out. That's when we saw people flipping cop cars, pooping on cop cars, lighting it on fire, breaking out windows, looting stores. And so the big question I think we had going into this is the mayor just saying this to say it because she's on the record of saying being peaceful, or are there actual changes? And Maura, we have seen a lot more happening at this point from Salt Lake City Police. They sent to the newsrooms some guides for reporters that we hadn't seen before, where they'd been thinking through how to safely cover these and kind of some guidelines. So I thought that was good to see. They were getting more phone numbers and emails from people in the newsroom so they could communicate. Do you think that this is changing because of there's a new chief in town, or is this lessons learned from 2020 and
It's
we're not going to
both,
let
but
it
it's
burn?
because there's a new chief.
Yeah.
Because we have had successful protests. We had an incompetent chief that gave an incompetent response to 2020. We had successful protests prior, and I suspect that Chief Red will have successful protests now. Now, success may mean limited violence, but controlled violence. Like, it's not the responsibility of law enforcement, it's the responsibility of the protesters to be grown-ups and be good. So success means not out of control. And I suspect that Red is prepared, and I am going to credit the chief if it goes well, because what happened in 2020 was really incompetence.
Whose call was it, though? Do you think the chief was in charge, or was the mayor in charge?
Mike Brown was never in charge, which is why he should have been let go. And the mayors should not be responsible for law enforcement results.
Oh, I agree,
So,
but I think she was.
So no, I'm
I heard she was
suggesting
approving
that
people
she
who got
was
promotions,
she was. So
everything.
what broke down is the mayor took the place of someone who should have had area of expertise. The problem was, and if this mayor overrides Chief Red, I ask that he tell us that, because if the experts are not allowed to do their jobs, because this is my point about going back to the 90s. Law enforcement in America, competent law enforcement, does actually know how to deal, even when it's in the thousands, even when it's not just, two people walking down the
Don't you think
street.
we're more insane now than the 90s, though? I just think it's different times as well. I think we live in crazier times
We're
than we did in
ruder.
the 90s.
We're
performative.
We're
Or
horrible.
social
But
media.
I was kind of
performative
happy.
politics.
Like,
It's just,
I
just
also
think
just
it's
don't want
nuts.
to them. So I was stuck in a bit of traffic watching our
Yeah, you
protesters
were.
tonight, and I liked the signs. Like, if we're just talking about who they are, one said monarchs should be butterflies. Like, okay, that's not go beat somebody.
Yes.
It was, most of the signs were, here's who I stand for, here's what I'm doing. Most of the people, like, I had to let a few cross the street. So just from someone who was stuck in traffic for the last 20 minutes, I found them all very polite.
Yes.
I found them all sort of wanting to get to the impromptu parade ground, but I didn't find anybody. There wasn't the verve of 2020.
There was a small fist fight that we saw that was at the city county grounds, but that seemed to be broken up pretty quickly. And those were counter protesters who were trying to start the fight.
And what becomes a problem is one of the things that law enforcement has done successfully in the past. Let's take Occupy. So folks, I mean, Occupy went on and on and on and on and on. Yeah. And there were counter protests to that. And one of the things that law enforcement did is say, okay, you over there say and do whatever you want. You over here say and do whatever you want, but you guys aren't talking to each other. That's not what the point of this is. And so getting rid of people trying to work out. And I do think we're heightened. I think social media is a cesspool. I think this ability to rally social media and get you so hot by the time you physically show up is a problem.
Yes.
Where before, I think you weren't coming in hot. You
just were showing up. You didn't know what to expect.
I think there have been lessons learned. I just wouldn't lay it all at the feet of Salt Lake City. I think the state is just eminently more prepared for its role, if it has a role. I think the Capitol, where it was vandalized and spray painted, I don't think that'll ever happen this time around. I think there were lessons learned from 5 years ago. Because I would categorize 5 years ago a failure of leadership from the city level all the way to the state. I think it was ridiculous to let that thing go unattended and let it get as violent as it did and destructive. And I believe there has been mighty lessons learned from this, and that is why I think I'm pretty bullish on the idea that it's going to be peaceful. I don't think there's going to be violence. Now, it's starting a little earlier. I thought this whole thing was supposed to get underway Saturday.
Thursdays are the new Friday.
And it's like, I hope they don't just get themselves all wound up too early and then I don't know what happens Saturday. But I really think everybody, I hope, understands from the lessons learned from 2020 that if you let that violence go unattended, it just grows. It has a momentum to it. So I think the state, and I like the idea that when I hear some of the things, and I saw that Mendenhall said that she embraces, supports protests, but if there's any violence, they're not going to allow for it. I hope that's her chief of police's influence that's helping her come to that. But I think having Brian Redd, having been the number 2 at the Department of Public Safety, he knows the state, he knows the Department of Public Safety and Jess Anderson very well. I think they're going to be coordinating just inherently because it's their skill set. I think that helps the state understand, the governor understand his role. He was lieutenant governor when this thing went awry in 2020. So I think he has said out, we're not going to let that go unattended. We're going to address it. All of that to say, I think that Salt Lake City stands an incredibly good chance of having a robust, loud protest and no violence. And I think if we can get out of this with no political violence, then we win.
High five for that.
That's all. I mean, I'm against political violence without regard to side of the aisle. I'm against it, and I think that I'm seeing leadership that will prevent that from happening.
The only thing I'll add that I would like to challenge our law enforcement, and I think there are so much data that shows this. One of the key things I think that many cities across the nation did wrong in 2020 is what we know is that when law enforcement, this is why the National Guard concerns me, whether Trump brought them in or someone else. I'm not actually going back to LA with this comment, but one of the gives and takes about corralling citizens is that when we see use of force, when we see a tank and a riot gear and some guy decked out and some banner between the two of us, we do know that violence begets violence. And so one of the things that we've seen from really smart departments is they're not putting their SWAT guys out front. Are they ready to go? Yes. Like, that's a preparedness issue. Are we ready for escalation? Yes. But some of the best handled protests are when law enforcement is facilitating protesters in their right to speak while keeping me safe. But part of it is this attitude of, I'm here. I'm here to protect you, and I'm here to protect you, and you're both equally important. So if you get out of hand, I'm going to rein you back in. But I do think when law enforcement comes in with sort of a, I'm going to kick your butt, like when they come in riot geared and swatted up, it's the wrong message, because what they should be saying is, I'll treat you well if you treat me well. And I think that's just universal. And I will say, I'm sort of being nice about it. you see tactical breakdowns, and it happens when any form of military or law enforcement comes in heavy, because the response to that is, you're stopping me, not helping me, and I'm going to push back. So I do think that Red is so professional, and what I'm hoping is when we have seen a breakdown in protests, or when you saw that first round of protests a few months ago at the Capitol, and what did they do? They helped them stay safe. They gave them a normal amount of time. They said, listen, block this thoroughfare, say your piece, but now I gotta have you move on because I also need traffic to move on. That's the role of a community policing. That's where police are significantly better prepared than the military to handle this, because if we can set the parameters, meet protesters with respect, help protesters voice what they're stressed about, and then require them to also move along. But I think when we come in hot and we come in with just use of force, it breaks down.
So I'm not an expert on these riots and how they're quelled or anything like that. But where I've seen them coming in hot is usually, for me, when I've seen it is when it's gotten pretty bad already, when things are on fire, when things have gotten,
which happened here in 2020. Didn't the National Guard come in July at some point when, after the DA's office had all the red paint and the windows broken out? I think the governor at that point called up the National Guard.
So I think coming in hot sometimes is, if it's allowed to become very violent, that's when this line starts and you start to see the riot gear and everything else. So I agree with you. I think that, but you have to.
Well, I think there has to be some gear on the way in. So and I was hoping that and they were sitting in there, and I'm like, ooh, you need to move it back a few feet.
I think there's going to be some National Guard, even around the Capitol. I would suspect that. I wouldn't be surprised to see it from the very beginning. I think you'd see that just to avoid what happened in 2020. But I think they'll be on the ready. But what I hope is there's enough presence where it is not allowed to grow, where it isn't allowed to feed the flame and become so violent that you then need a higher level of force. So I think that it's a measuring, it's a balance. I think that's what you described, Maura. But if you have too light of a presence, it might be your response time to deal with someone deciding to overturn a car or break out store windows. You might not be able to address it as quickly if you're too skinny and not on the scene. So I don't know what that balance is. I leave it to the law enforcement professionals. But I'm at least hearing, as a citizen, the resolve to address violence as soon as it were to erupt and to try and put it down so that it doesn't grow. And I think, to me, I'm glad to hear that as a citizen. Yeah. And so if we can keep that away from it, let the protest go. I'm not that angsty about the protest. They can protest. You know how many they have at the Capitol all the time? You know how many protests I've seen?
There are a lot of protests.
There's a zillion of them. Who cares?
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Who cares? But it's also like fundamentally American.
It's part of what we
sort
do.
of like good for you.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, do you remember? I
Go.
work on First South, and I can attest to the tenacity of the Tibetans who are in front of the federal building. Yeah. And I sort of, I'm like, good for them. This has been years.
Yeah.
And that's the right of an American.
Yeah. And time flies. When you guys were talking about the Capitol, it reminded me, I have a nephew who was a teenager at the time when that happened. His dad worked for DPS, my brother-in-law, and watching what was happening there, he decided to go from wanting to be a pilot to being a UHP trooper, and he is now a trooper. Watch out, he could pull you over. Yeah.
I'm sure he has, actually. Yeah. Odds are high.
He's brand new. He's only been out there for a month, so give it time.
Oh, he is the worst. Those newbies.
Those newbies, I know. I asked if crying would help if I was pulled over, and he said, no, that makes it worse.
Yeah, I agree with him. But I do think that you have a choice. You can either give me a lecture or a ticket. I think when you give me both, you've overstepped our social contract.
Look at you.
I am. I'm like, you can either give me a firm lecture or you can give me a ticket. But please don't do both. I don't deserve both.
You say that like you get a choice. You get what you get. They come to the window. You might get a lecture and a ticket.
I have gotten a lecture and a ticket, but I'm just saying the social contact bears.
I never thought about that, but it's true.
One or the other.
Yeah. I just want a lecture and then leave me alone. I don't have to tell my husband.
I'll take either. Just don't give me both.
I like that.
I like that too. Before we get deep back into Los Angeles and what's happening there, Governor Herbert joined us on our morning show here for Arc Salt Lake, and he had some interesting things to say where he was siding with Governor Gavin Newsom, saying that, I'm trying to find his quotes, that really it should be the governor's choice when we're talking about that, federalism and who should be in charge. And he really was saying that, this shouldn't have happened. The National Guard should not have gone in there. Greg, do you believe that Governor Herbert is correct in that? And as we've been talking about, that this should be something that's left to the governor and we shouldn't go back to the 1960s and the federal government making these decisions?
So I couldn't have been more disappointed in Governor Herbert's comments, because the way he reflects on what happened in May of 2020 is just simply not accurate. He talked about a coordination between Department of Public Safety, National Guard, the mayor of Salt Lake City, and that he described in his interview that went quite well. Well, I have on my phone a bunch of pictures and images that would show you that it did not go quite well. It did not go well at all. I saw members of law enforcement with stitches in their face after these riots occurred, where they had bricks thrown at their face. I've seen the images of the Capitol and how it was defaced. None of that can be described 5 years later as it went quite well. I don't know what he's talking about when he says that. I think that's why you see what was then the lieutenant governor, the governor today, making sure they're not sitting and waiting for someone to tell them in 6 hours that they might want to be involved, that they are being very proactive in trying to keep the peace and make sure that violence doesn't break out. So I felt like his description of how he handled this in 2020 as a success doesn't track with what really happened at all. The other thing is, again, if what was happening in Salt Lake City, you were to say is not just 6 hours before interrupted, but went 24 hours or 36, depending on who's saying, whose account you trust. My goodness, you have to get someone to come in if this city is burning for 24 hours, even if it's in a specific location and just some shop owners are getting their stuff destroyed. That looting is going on. You cannot let that go on for 24 to 36 hours. And if a mayor doesn't have and a governor doesn't have the leadership to intervene prior to that, I would hope that the president would take action. And as I said earlier in the podcast, I didn't know until just recently, even that action was really centralized around federal facilities and federal agents who were being attacked in that area. So
I'm going to speak more to Gary Herbert's point about when the federal government should intervene versus when the state should intervene. And I really appreciated that he made that point on behalf of what has been actually a conservative's point of view for decades, for
States'
my
rights.
life. And one of the things that I am super disappointed by right now is that more and more elected officials are just doing political tilting at Trump's agenda. And I do think they're suspending their actual value system. And when they do that, they lose the trust of all of us that say, but wait a minute, I thought you believed in this. And you can't believe in a government approach only when your team is wearing the jersey. And that's more and more the complaint we all have, that if the Dems do it, I'm okay with it. And if the Republicans do it, you're okay with it. And that's what all of our state leaders, I feel like, are doing right now. Gary Herbert's the only person that says, I don't care who's doing it. I don't believe in that. And it does take away the credibility of my Republican conservative friends who have for years had fights with me over federalism. And now they're like, this is awesome. I love the feds. I hope they'll come in more. And I'm like, okay, but you're suspending your through line of ideology and your point of view. And it becomes a less reliable policy point of view, and it just turns it into politics. Herbert's the only one that I've heard that is like, yeah, I'm not going to be political about it. I just don't believe that the Fed should intervene with a governor and we have a governor who used to, is the recent past president of the Governors Association, and he's cheering the federal intervention. Great, but don't come whining about public lands. Don't come whining that Bill Clinton didn't call you before he made a monument. Don't come you can't choose.
Can't have it both ways.
Or you can actually, but I'm going to view you as strictly a politician and not someone vested in politics or conservatism or any sort of through line on policy process.
So the philosophy is fine, and I think, and I don't think anyone would argue it. But in the absence of the leadership of a governor who will call them in and restore order, then that's when you start to see the role of the president become more
but
prominent.
You're seeing it as an absolute right
there's
choice.
nothing absolute.
I disagree with President Trump's choice and agree with Gavin Newsom's choice.
Let me just share with you.
Take out of it that you agree with the choice and talk about
I just want to talk
the
facts.
philosophy.
Because I looked this up. In the May 30th riot in Salt Lake City, the first reported protest that was violent was at 11 a.m. Gary Herbert announced that he was activating the National Guard at 5:15 p.m. I don't know anybody who at least was tracking those events who would think that that calling them in at 5:15 when they saw the protests get violent at 11 a.m., that he was fast acting and that it was the right decision. People think it should have happened faster. Fast forward to what happened in Los Angeles. The protests and the stopping of the ICE agents and getting in their way and stopping their cars and damaging them began Friday, June 6th. It was not until Sunday that it was announced that the National Guard would come, because that's not from 11 a.m. to 5:15. We're talking Sunday on a Friday where the violence began. There is a clear indication that they are not. There has to be stood down. I think Mayor Bass was doing what Mayor Mendenhall did in 2020. She was telling her officers to stand down and let them go. Well, 300 only on Sunday. So it starts on Friday. There's only 300 National Guard that show up in LA on Sunday. It's on Monday where the 2,000 additional troops come in, and then you have the 700 Marines. So my point in all that is, if you go 24 to 36 hours without the governor and the state's rights exercising those rights, and people's lives are being threatened and damage is being done, something has to be done. And I think it resembles in many ways in 1992, even though you had a better governor and a better mayor who actually thanked George W. Bush for bringing in those troops. Colin Powell coordinated the Army, the Marines, the National Guard, okay? He was the central command for the 1992 riots. Colin Powell was, not federally, because he had a governor that they knew that things had gotten out of control. A lot of this depends on the leadership of your governor and your mayor. They have to prioritize this, and I think that sadly, the politics of Trump equals bad, they're going to let that city burn before they'd ever reach out to President Trump for help. There's been enough cases where you've seen a smart coordination of leaders without regard to party, where that should have happened in LA and it did not. And that's why I think you saw the action taken. But to say it's never happened, of course it's happened in terms of how they've coordinated, or if the federal authority has been kind of the coordinator or doing it. I just think that if you're going to, let's just forget all that, or we talked about that. I think we have that coordination in Utah coming up today and then through the weekend. Thankfully, I think we have a mayor and a Department of Public Safety and a governor. I think everybody's on the same page right now is my impression, and I think that's going to show good leadership, and that will result in no violence.
The crux of what's unacceptable and the crux of what the courts ruled on is that the National Guard, the military, was weaponized against citizens without the consent of the local jurisdiction. That's the crux. It wasn't competence of the local jurisdiction. It was that the National Guard was weaponized against an unconsenting state. So when you talk about your criticism of Gary Herbert, but that's not the issue.
Yeah. I think it plays into the decision tree. Of course it does.
It is. No, we were not. There is no evidence that it was out of control, or what I should say is that's a matter of opinion, because you're making a quality case that you thought it had reached that level. I can equally, based on my facts, make a quality case. So that's in the eye of the beholder. What the question is when is it acceptable? And we're talking military. And again, I'm going to go back to what a difference is. A guy with a gun is not a guy with a gun. There was a story that was so interesting about a local member of law enforcement who had since retired and was sort of talking through his point of view on the difference between local law enforcement and the military. And he said, here, I'll give you an example. We were in coordination with the National Guard. He said this was a consensual action. This was not around a protest. This was around a drug thing. And they were working in coordination. And I had my guys there. He was leading a SWAT team. And he said, I had the military there and I wanted him there and I was excited to have him there. One of his command staff says to the military guy, hey, cover us. Now, when I started telling this story to my husband, who's former law enforcement, I didn't know the punchline. He starts laughing and says, oh, this is what these guys did. And I said, yes, I didn't understand the language difference. So cover us has two incredibly different commands. He says, this local law enforcement says to the military, cover us. Bless their hearts, the military starts laying down suppressive fire into a neighborhood. The guy is like,
because that's what cover
what?
is.
What are we doing? What are we doing? And he's like, stop. Nobody got hurt. But he said, what was that about? And the guy was like, you said cover you. He said, in our language, covers us means tell us if someone walks out on the porch. Tell us if someone's behind us. These are different apparatuses having different trainings and different expectations. And Greg, that was with coordination. So I hear you, but for the federal government to override in a situation, and I will further indict the Trump administration that the number one complaint from the governor and the mayor and the chief of police is lack of coordination. So if the Trump administration is sincere about this, why is ICE not coordinating? Why is the National Guard not coordinating? Why
Because
is
they're
it
sanctuary
homeless?
states. They oppose them.
Oh,
They're
I don't
telling
like
them
your
to stay
political
out.
point of view, so
No,
I'm not going to
they don't
coordinate
wanna
law
follow
enforcement with you.
They don't want to follow the
You
federal
know that
law.
sanctuary
They're
state is
against-
a political
they're
term of art.
against
It's
the
not a
federal
legal
law.
term of art.
They are trying to
It's not a
stop
legal
the
term of art.
federal
We're
agents
talking
from doing
about
their
right
job. That's
now,
the problem.
right now
That
in a
is the
hot
problem.
spot. So they're taking politics and saying, we're not going to coordinate
that
with you
governor and
because
mayor
we
using
don't like your
politics.
politics.
Yep.
And so the Trump administration is trying to talk and label people, and they don't want to coordinate, and that puts Americans in harm's way and is
The
irresponsible,
decision to not coordinate
shallow
was from
in
that
politics.
governor and from that mayor.
Speaking
You
of
even
shallow
heard-
politics, I think Governor Newsom, in some ways, is loving this because he's getting like a great resume of video he can use
And
when
Trump
he's running
is loving
for president.
it, right?
Yeah.
Both of them are
Yeah.
loving this.
Yes. So will be interesting to see how this. I'm hoping things die out and are not crazy in LA
We're
tonight.
going to be fine in Utah. That's all I know.
We're going to be fine here. We're always fine here in Utah. Well, I'm going to leave it at that. Hopefully by next week, we're not still talking about this and things are going peacefully. Although if you have some volunteer hours, Mayor Karen Bass was saying that they have so much graffiti that it's going to be difficult to get rid of it before the World Cup comes next year in 2026.
Oh, that's a bummer.
So anyhow, stop doing graffiti.
Guess what?
Stop
I heard
doing
that
the
if
graffiti.
someone said at the resident of LA that if that riot would have actually spread into the neighborhoods of wealthy people and people whose homes would have been threatened, the coordination would have been perfect. This was an area that either are businesses, hipsters, homeless, but it's not an area that was impacting large neighborhoods or citizenry. If it did get out there, if it had spread, then you would have seen a different approach by the governor and the mayor. So maybe that's a cynic's approach, but that's what I heard.
Yeah, I think that's a little partisan take there.
All
right.
Good for you.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Want to bring it back to Salt Lake City here. It feels early to me to be talking about city council races, but I've seen a bunch of people online, not all of them name brands, getting into the city council races because odd years are municipal. And a name that I didn't expect to see, Liddy Huntsman, daughter of John Huntsman, the former governor and ambassador, is getting in on the action in the Salt Lake City race. Greg, is this something you expected? Do you like this? Mixing up the blood?
Man, if none of my children are going to be entering public service anytime soon. They had
You've
a dad that
soured
did
them
it.
to it?
I didn't sour. I thought I was actually performing a civic duty, but I think what my kids, my boys maybe didn't pay attention as close, but my daughter would not be doing what Liddy's doing because I don't know that she liked what she saw in terms of the ugly side or face of politics.
Yeah.
But if Liddy Huntsman learned, and her father's a great leader and was a great public servant, if she wants to get involved, I think she's got it in the DNA, doesn't she? So I think she should be involved if she wants to be.
Yeah, and Maura, we've talked about in the past that the Salt Lake City Council is not very diverse in that a lot of them are just the same way of thinking, and she might actually be a little diversity, even though it's not what you'd think of in Utah, that she might be able to mix things up a little.
Yeah, I'm super proud that as a Salt Laker that it's the majority minority, but that is not the same as diversity. So,
right.
so I, as a Salt Laker, the sort of colloquial of saying a lot of minorities do represent me well, but we don't have a lot of balance. We do have a singular point of view. I like anyone getting into a city council races because cities are so important, and our capital city does, for better or worse, impact a lot more than just their own jurisdiction, partly because so many people drive into work, partly because the center of government is here, and they're big and they represent, and that'll even be more so. I like that she's in. I also like that she is a seasoned communicator. I hope she uses her skills for good.
Yes.
My version of
She's
good
also
is
funny too. She was a part-time comedian for a while, so she might mix it up a little.
yeah, and I hope she elevates the conversation. I would love it if Salt Lake City would like to talk about roads for a minute. I would love it if Salt Lake City would like to talk about just the basics here for
Pick up
just
my
a second.
garbage, kids.
If you cut one more road, if you stop one more flow of traffic, if you continue to erode NOx emissions because you're slowing everything down, if you continue to put in these cute speed bumps that don't do anything, I mean, like, let's talk about classic city issues. And the reason that people don't hate city politics is they're relatable. It is about my street. It is about,
It's
and I have
closest to the people.
control over it. So I hope this draws, I hope someone with a little bit of name recognition drives up voter turnout. But
Yeah.
it feels so early. I shouldn't
It does
say
feel
that. It
super early because November seems
Having
forever
said
away.
that, I've been getting
I think the primaries
fundraising
are going to be
calls.
You
coming up
have?
fast.
They totally are. yeah.
Lydia Huntsman, at least she comes in with her eyes wide open. I mean, a lot of people may want to run, they want to throw their hat in
And
the
not
ring,
know
they
what
want to
it-
be a public servant, but they might not know what that actually entails. I think Lydia Huntsman is a candidate, because it's news to me, but as I think about it, I do think you have a candidate willing to do this who has seen a lot of public service and
Yeah.
so knows what that means. And so, yeah, I think it's a great bit of news.
All right, high five to all of you that are running for municipal elections this year. And when we get closer, we'll talk more about it. While we're on Salt Lake City, Maura brought this up earlier when we were pre-talking before the podcast, but Salt Lake City's just in the limelight this week. The governor at his monthly news conference was talking flags, talking both sides of the flag, really.
Well, it's like he so very rarely fumbles, but this was a fumble from a PR perspective. This was like, dude, you're making a not a good 3-day story here.
Yeah, so
And then
Gerke from the Trib asked him about the flags.
I just really didn't like he's usually so good at being every guy, and so his dumb is dumb is dumb. The problem I have with that, so I'll get personal. I had this same bipartisan reaction when Mayor Mendenhall was complaining about how hard her job was after the earthquakes and after the riots,
yes.
and she was like, and I'm like, yeah, not up for it, get out.
Yeah.
When I hear the governor go, this is so stupid, I hate all of this. Yeah, not up for it, get out. Like, you didn't veto it. You haven't used your bully pulpit on it. If the legislature's being stupid and if Salt Lake City's being stupid, I expect more of you than to just call it out. I expect you to lead through it. And I agree with him. I think that I continue my speech of could someone talk about roads and transportation, but I didn't like that what he used his bully pulpit for was to name call. I'm like, yeah, so
At least he didn't burn the
show
new Salt
them
Lake
the
City
way.
flag.
But like, show them the way. Why are you just giving the no, you're not, but what am I more energy? Why aren't you giving something else that we should be focusing on? And yet I felt like you just threw fire on the who's dumb.
So, yeah, I think it was an attempt, probably just wasn't the most deepest, policy position he was trying to express.
was a
I think he was
reflexive
just trying to
response.
say, hey, you know what, it's all political theater, whatever he's saying. But I've heard, and I don't have this firsthand, so maybe I'm wrong, but I've heard that Polynesian community feels that there's not a flag that's representing them. The West Side feels that their side of the city is on the wrong end of the
So
stick a lot. They want to be
The
represented.
governor mentioned this. This is what the governor
Did he?
said in his
Okay,
remarks.
so but I thought that the one thing the governor said that was that's in the law that was passed and is a solution is that we all rally around the United States flag, the state of Utah's flag. Everybody can
Which
identify.
flag, the new flag or the old flag?
Well, I like the old one. I really hate change, so I like the old flag. But I just think there's some we don't have to go and we talked about this last week. I'm so fatigued over identity politics. I don't think it's made this country any more unified. I just think it's something worse to fight about. I think if we can just rally around our American flag, our state flag, and then don't game up your city flag. Have a city flag and let everyone look at it and go, that's my city. I just think it's a healthier way to go. And
But that was my
I thought
contention.
that-
He didn't replace it with higher thinking. So you and I have had long conversations about identity politics, and there's
Yes.
a lot to be had, and we
have,
actually
yes.
agree on it to a large degree.
Do we?
He didn't
Do we
elevate.
really?
He,
I feel better if we do.
He
Do we?
didn't elevate that topic. He just sort of went back to it, and I think it was an opportunity missed. I need
thought he
our
mentioned
leaders
the US
to.
flag.
He did, but that's a regurgitation of the
Okay.
argument we've been having. I need everyone to
I wasn't
elevate it.
regurgitating. I was saying it.
a
I was
scotch.
trying to say. I was
know.
trying to
You-
say.
at
Can
the
we
end
have
you did.
something
This is what I'm
we
saying.
can all get around?
So I'm like, go high, go higher,
Okay.
go
All right.
bigger.
Go bigger. We should end it there, but I'm going to bring this up really quickly before we go. This one
We
last
don't-
thing,
we
because it'll
don't
get
go
lost.
big.
I don't
We
know.
don't go
They're
big.
parading around out there. I might not be able to get out of this place
I
with my
know.
car, so I might be here for a while.
I just wanted to mention that Utah legislators are opposing a piece of the big, beautiful bill that I think a lot of people in the House, when they voted for it, didn't realize it was there. That's the problem with big, beautiful bills. There's so many pages, you just don't know what's inside of it. But there was essentially an AI moratorium that blocked a Utah state law that was on the books kind of getting ready for AI and what was going to happen. And this national law, if passed, would make it so that states couldn't do anything. You'd kind of have to wait it out for 10 years for working on AI. So I like that they're being involved and they're looking into this. Maura, is this an important part of the conversation, or it's a big, beautiful bill? Let's just see what happens.
Oh, the bill stinks because it's just a Christmas. It's all the wrong ways to do things. And the sycophants in the House took a pass. Shame on them.
Just
But-
stick with this part, please.
But the Senate was awesome. And thank goodness the state legislature is sticking to their guns on something. And they might actually provide coverage to the senators who want to do this. Now, in defense of the Senate and the Senate Republicans, there's a ton of people who have an issue with this. Yeah. It did slip past unnoticed. That's because no one read the bill apparently in the House. But hey, good news, senators, some of them are readers. And so there's a lot of opposition. And this is for my cheekiness. There's a ton of bipartisan opposition on this.
There should
and
be.
so I think this gets stopped, but good for Utah for leading the way on pointing out this subset
Who put
of
that
text.
stupid piece of garbage in
Here's
there?
what's so scary about that, other than the Terminator movies that we know happens when AI gets control of everything, and we're going to have 10 years where we're not allowed to get involved. That would be terrible. I've seen that movie. But here's the thing. I've been told that the AI it's an emerging, it's not just a technology, it's a sector. It's going to have its own economy attached to it. It's going to have such an impact on the way we live our lives that the amount of energy it requires is going to be, it's beyond anything anyone really understood. I was told that by 2030, we're in 2025, so I'm not saying like a generation from now. In 5 years, if AI were to be allowed to be developed to the degree they think it could, it would require all the energy created on our current grid right now. With us going dark, the
That's
rest
why
of the
we
country.
need nuclear power, Greg.
And you know what? Guess what? So Bill Gates wants to do 3 Mile Island. Everybody's good now. Nuclear is no longer the
no longer the
wicked
bad guy.
stepchild anymore. Now it's being seen and pursued as an energy generation because we're going to need it, and we're going to need a lot. So the reason that moratorium is scary for me is if you don't have states and leaders who can understand just the power demand that is going to be needed here and start to be able to work in this space, you can't make that a moratorium for a decade and see what we get at the other end or on the other side. It's going to take 50 states, smart entrepreneurs. It's going to take professionals in all of these areas to start figuring out what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, how do we keep it safe. All of that should be done, and not one person should be cast away or prevented from engaging in the issue of AI. It's such an important and emerging technology, and it has such a vast impact to this society. That moratorium, I really, really am surprised it's in there
That
first,
part's not
but I hope it
beautiful,
gets
is
out.
it?
No, it's
not
not.
I think
beautiful
it
at
needs to get
all.
out.
Yeah, less
They
big
need
is
that
the
out.
answer. And in case you wanted something to think about to keep you up at night, I was talking to someone the other day who told me that I needed to think about copyrighting my face, and that we all need to, because with AI, if you don't copyright your face, sometimes somebody's going to use it and they're just going to make AI you cartoons or whatever kind of South Park videos with you. So,
So talk about going to the dark side of the moon. I think I'm headed to a plot of land in the middle of Paiute County and some infrared detectors. So
Yeah, I know. I just think there's just too many movies that have told us what's coming next that we can't be this naive. We have to know it's not good if we're.
our evil twins are going to take over the world. It's not the aliens we've been worried about.
I
Someone's
know.
going to, I don't know, make some AI bots that look just like us.
yeah, you're probably already gone.
I think
I think the evil twins have already cloned my friend.
Jeez, yeah, it'll be a sport. I'll be the first in line to just totally wipe me out and put a different
and it'll
me
be
out
so
there.
believable. We'll
Yeah.
be like, that was great. I always knew he was that guy.
He was always that evil
Man.
guy.
I know our grandkids someday are going to be doing the coolest things. We're going to be like, what?
Yeah.
So
Hopefully it's all good. I hope it's all good upside. I hope it is. I really do.
with all
I
the
worry.
good comes a little bit of bad. So we're not going to worry about that today. Today we'll focus on protesters. And do you want to give us a score of how your team's doing here
I
before
got
we leave?
here to the studio. Florida was winning 3-0. It was 3-1. I was like, we still got the game in hand. It's
No.
3-3. It's 3-3. I'm just so sad.
Oh, Canada.
I would suggest though that you either
Third period.
turn that off while you're driving home tonight, or maybe just listen on the radio. Don't watch that while driving.
Greg told me before this started that he was going to join the tail end of the protest.
Oh,
so
okay.
he's got
No,
some
I'm
time.
Did you bring a flag?
You know what? I have the weirdest emotion. I probably shouldn't even.
Was it
admit
laugh
this.
you through
No.
tears? That's my
Oh, we're
favorite.
gonna
this
end
is
with
gonna,
a
no, this is
confession.
and this is just gonna tick people off.
This is
I think.
juicy, guys. I'm glad you
I
stuck
see
around.
all the protesting.
Oh,
and I
don't
see
say
all the
it.
angst,
I don't like your tone right now.
and I don't care. And I'm happy I don't. It's like, you go be you do it. But my guy's in charge. My guy's is the president, and I like what's going on, and I know, and I think people should be able to protest. But I'm not all wound up about it, and I feel some peace in that.
And hence the protests for nice middle-aged white guys. He's giving passion to
please.
many
You're
a person.
the strongest demographic out there
The person.
protesting are the boomers right now. I'm telling you, that's true.
Not
They
what I
are.
saw. I was
The boomers are the
pleasantly
ones that-
surprised by the young people
It's
I
like
saw
Woodstock
walking around.
reemerged in the brains of every
I think
boomer there is.
everyone who
It's the
wants to
craziest
protest is
thing.
protesting. I was looking at a lot of the signs from snapshots, and I'm like, LGBTQIA, something like everyone's got a sign for
Throw
something,
it
and
in.
it's not necessarily have to do with like icing out ice, but
It's a lot of ice.
yeah, if you're
Ice
mad
is the
about
fave.
something, yeah, that's
Go
the
protest.
fave. But if you've
Well,
got a side
I feel
hustle,
like the
fine.
14th is all about the side hustle.
Yeah, so
You
anyhow.
go protest.
So we'll see how that goes on Saturday.
I'm carefree. I don't.
I
have
would
any
like it to
problems.
be
I don't have
peaceful
anything to
because
protest about.
I'm on call
I'm
when
good.
things go wild. So everyone, just behave. Yeah. So thanks for joining us on this exciting breaking news night. Be peaceful. Be nice. Tell your friends about us. Give us a 5-star review. We'll
Shout
be
out
back
to
again
Heidi
next
Hatch.
week.
She's got a lot going on here, and she puts this together every week. You're doing a great job. I know it's
You flatter
a
me.
lot. No, seriously.
Well, thanks for
appreciate
coming in.
it. Okay.